Welcome everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution setup video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Las Vegas. Now, Las Vegas is a 1.5 mile track, which generally means for this game that you can run it wide open. However, I don't recommend that you run it wide open, even though you can, and we'll get to the reason why here in just a second. But first, before we get to the setup information itself, let's talk about lap times. The AI at 105% or max difficulty will qualify at about a 30.5 second lap. That's 30.5 seconds. And their lap time in the race is around 31 seconds flat to a 31.1 or so. The setup we're going to be taking a look at in this particular video will run anywhere from 29.7 to 29.8 second laps fairly easily around the track. And in fact, at the end of this video, after we're done discussing the setup itself, I'm going to show you about a 10 lap run so you can get an idea of how I approach the track, and as well as how I approach the traffic around the track, because during 10 lap run, most of the time during those laps I spend around quite a bit of traffic, so it'll give you an opportunity to see how stable the car is, as well as running different groups from the bottom, middle, and all the way up to the top of the track. So as you can see from the lap times, we are a good 6 to 8 tenths of a second per lap faster than them during qualifying, and somewhere around a second per lap faster than them under race conditions. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to skip over the shock settings because, once again, I've left those at all 10s across the board. No reason to really jump into that and make any changes. We'll move on to the bottom left-hand portion of the screen and the weight settings. Because we're on an oval, the left side weight is maxed out at 54.2%. The front weight here, you've got some wiggle room here. I've chosen to go with 50.2%. Although you could increase that a little bit if you feel like the car is too unstable and wants to over-rotate and get loose, particularly on entry to the corner. So feel free to increase that up around 50.5 or even higher if need be. Wedge is at 50.5%, a little bit lower than I would traditionally use for a 1.5 mile track, but everything works together in a setup, so it's not one thing by itself. So with some of the other settings I was using, 50.5 felt a little better, helped the car to rotate. Keep in mind that with Wedge, this particular setting dictates pretty heavily how quickly the car rotates. So if you want the car to rotate slowly and more under control going into and coming off the corner, then you'll want to use a higher number. So feel free to jump that number up to 51% or even higher, depending on how loose the car is for you. Front and rear ride heights stay at the minimum of 4 inches. And that brings us to the spring settings. The left front spring is maxed out, which is becoming a trend at most of the tracks. And the reason is because we really need the car to rotate, particularly on entry, to allow us to carry as much speed into the corner. And the game seems to reward us for using the maximum amount of left front spring. Right front spring is a couple of 100 pounds less than that at 1,000. And again, from previous videos, if you've watched those, and you know that the reason why I use a stiffer left front than right front spring is because that helps the car to rotate on entry. So if the car is getting loose with you on entry, then one of the things you can do is lower the left front spring or increase the right front spring, or do both if the car is really loose for you. In the rear of the car, we have a left rear spring of 400 pounds and a right rear of 500 pounds. Only 100 pounds of spring split here. And I can tell you, you could use more than that. You could drop the left rear down to 350 or even 300, or possibly even increase the right rear. But I chose only 100 pounds of split simply because that seemed to keep the car stable under corner entry, middle, and exit for me. But as always, feel free to play around with those numbers. If the car doesn't turn as well as you want, particularly on exit, then feel free to decrease that left rear spring, would probably be your best bet to help the car to rotate. Now that brings us over to the tire pressure settings. For the left sides, I use 25 pounds and the right sides 30 pounds. So only 5 pounds of split here. And again, that was for stability purposes. The more I increase the split, I did not go really much below 25 pounds on the left side. However, on the right side, I did test up to 40 and even more pounds. So I tested, anywhere from 10, 15, and in some cases even 20 pounds of split on the tire pressures, but finally went down to only 5 as a final setting because, again, it keeps the car more stable under rotating for you guys. But if you're looking to gain some more speed, this is the first thing I would try. Try moving the right sides from 30 up to 35 or 40 and see how you like the car. I can tell you that the higher you get the right side pressures, the more that the back end is going to want to come around and the looser the car is going to be. So be prepared for that. But there's definitely some speed to be had by increasing particularly the right sides. Okay, miscellaneous settings are next. And let's look at the cameras. Left front and right front cameras are both maxed out at 10 degrees. As mentioned in previous videos, this does make the car pull very hard to the left. So if that's happening to you and you're having a hard time controlling the car, particularly on the straightaways, then feel free to reduce these numbers. My recommendation was, if you're going to do that, then try to drop both by half. Drop them each down to 5 degrees and see if that helps out at all. If it does, and you need to go a little further, then continue reducing that number. But just keep in mind that as you do that, you could be reducing grip, which will change your lap times and the handling overall of the car. So just keep that in mind as you make those changes. Front sway bar is at 1.5. If the car feels like it doesn't rotate as much as you need, particularly on corner entry, feel free to reduce that number down to 1.3 or even lower. But again, if the car is getting too loose on you, feel free to increase that number. But this seems to be a good setting for me to find a balance between the car rotating a little too much and not quite enough. So this is a good balance for me. Rear sway bar we're not using. The rear sway bar would normally help the car to rotate, particularly through the center and off the corner. But I was able to achieve that necessary rotation through other means, so I did not use it. That brings us to the track bar, which, as you can see, has a 1-inch split, left side being at 12 inches, right side being at 13 inches. If you're getting loose or tight on corner exit, this is probably the first place I would go, particularly if your entry is looking good. Then adjusting the track bar can really help the car to turn better from the middle of the corner off if you increase particularly the right side track bar. Now, if you're getting too loose from the center of the corner and on the exit of the corner, then reduce the right side track bar down to 12, maybe even 11. Try that. Try a reverse split on there, and that should help definitely tighten the car up on exit for you. Brake bias is at 72%. You're not going to need it for this track unless you choose to do some of the trail braking that I've mentioned in previous videos. But overall, the only reason to use the brake bias would be for green flag pit stops. Grill tape, we're not using it. I did an entire video on dedicated just to this particular setting. Hopefully they'll fix this in a future patch. But for now, the grill tape setting does nothing to increase downforce or seemingly reduce drag, so I'm ignoring it for now. Wheel lock, I've not touched. Steering offset, I decided on a 0.125 setting, and that seems to be a pretty good balance of helping to offset the pull to the left on the straightaways. The 0.15 settings seem to be a little bit too much, and the car would seem to want to pull to the right a little bit if I wasn't just exactly perfect with the steering down the straightaway. So I decided to leave a little bit of pull to the left with the 0.125. But as always, feel free to play around with that number. As you decrease that number and get it closer to 0, then you'll find that the car pulls harder and harder to the left on the straights. The gear setting, the only one I messed with was the last one, the rear end ratio. I finally chose a rear gear of 3.45. Again, this was chosen because it maxes out the RPM at the end of the straightaway. Definitely feel free to play around with this number. I believe there's some speed to be had there. I didn't mess with it any further simply because we were already so much faster than the AI that, I really didn't need to at this point. But if you're making these setups or using these setups for online purposes, then by all means, continue looking for more speed. The rear end ratio of 3.45, as I said, maxes out the RPMs, but the closer you get down toward 3, using maybe a 3.1, 3.2 number, that will lower your RPMs and could help the car to turn better through the corner in a more controlled fashion, since the engine isn't pulling quite so hard. So, hope you've enjoyed the video. Hopefully this setup works out for you. Stay tuned for, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, a series of about a 10 lap run with lap times anywhere from 29.7 all the way up through about a 30 flat, as it shows me working my way in and around traffic with just a couple of videos, or a couple of laps rather, where I actually make my way to the bottom of the track and attempt to maximize lap time. So stay tuned for that 10 lap run, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat Evolution.
That was a great lap. Still there, all clear. Car low, clear low. Still there, you're all clear. You're all clear. All clear. Car ahead is pitting.